The day I realized I had lived half my life wrong, my son wouldn't look me in the eye. He stood in my doorway with his coat still on, keys in his hand, like a man who had already decided he wasn't staying long. The winter light from the window fell across his face, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to sit on my shoulders at county fairs. But that boy was gone. "Dad," he said quietly, "you always told me a man has to be right." He paused, then added, "But sometimes a man just needs to be kind." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. And that silence, the same silence I'd used for 30 years, filled the room again. It's strange how wisdom works. A man can read 1,000 quotes from people like Mark Twain and nod his head like he understands life, but still miss the meaning entirely. I was that kind of man. For most of my life, I believed the same things many men believe. Work hard, be tough, never apologize unless you absolutely have to, and never let anyone think they've beaten you. I built my life around those rules, and for a long time, I thought they were working. I had a steady job at the hardware store downtown. I had a modest brick house on Maple Street. My wife Linda kept the kitchen warm with the smell of fresh bread most evenings, and my son grew up in the small bedroom at the end of the hall with baseball posters on the wall. From the outside, we looked like a family that had everything figured out. But life has a quiet way of revealing the truth. And the first sign that something in my world was beginning to crack came from something so small I almost ignored it. A question my wife asked me one Tuesday night at the dinner table. A question I answered the wrong way. And by the time I understood that mistake, it was already too late. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Nothing special. Linda had made chicken stew, the kind that simmered slowly all afternoon, filling the house with that soft, comforting smell that used to greet me when I came home from work. The kitchen light hung low over the table, and the ticking clock on the wall filled the spaces between our words. My son, Daniel, was 16 then. He sat hunched over his bowl, tapping his spoon against the rim the way teenagers do when their minds are somewhere else. Linda looked at me across the table. Her voice was gentle when she asked the question, "Do you ever wonder if we're living the life we meant to live?" I remember looking up from my plate, confused. "What kind of question is that?" I said. She shrugged slightly, but there was something fragile in the movement. "I don't know," she replied softly. "Sometimes it feels like we're all just going through the motions." Now, a wiser man might have leaned back in his chair. He might have listened, but I wasn't that man. Instead, I laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Linda, life isn't a poetry book," I said. "People who spend all their time wondering about meaning usually don't get much done." Daniel's spoon stopped tapping. Linda didn't argue. She simply nodded and returned to her meal. At the time, I felt satisfied with my answer. In my mind, I had done what a practical man should do: shut down pointless thinking and keep the family grounded in reality. But there's a line I once read from Mark Twain that I didn't understand back then. "The trouble isn't what you don't know, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And that night, sitting at my own dinner table, I was absolutely certain I was right. What I didn't realize was that something quiet had shifted inside my home. A silence had begun growing between my wife and me. And silence, once it settles into a house, has a way of spreading.
At first, the change was so small I barely noticed it. Linda still made dinner. The laundry was still folded neatly at the end of the bed. The house still smelled like cinnamon and soap most evenings. But something in her voice had grown quieter. Not sad, not angry, just distant. She stopped asking the kinds of questions she used to ask about dreams, about travel, about the future. Instead, our conversations became practical things. Did you pay the electric bill? Daniel has a game Friday. We're out of milk. For a man like me, that felt comfortable, orderly, predictable. I thought that meant everything was fine. But looking back now, I realize something important. When a woman stops arguing with you, it doesn't mean she agrees. Sometimes it just means she has stopped trying. Daniel noticed it before I did. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the garage fixing a broken lawnmower when he leaned against the doorway, watching me. "You know Mom's not happy, right?" he said. I didn't even look up. "Everybody gets unhappy sometimes," I replied, tightening a bolt. "That's life." He shifted his weight. "No," he said quietly. "It's different." I remember finally glancing at him then. "You're 16, I said. "You don't know anything about marriage." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and walked back inside the house. At the time, I felt like I had handled the conversation the way a father should. Firm, confident, certain. But certainty can be a dangerous thing, especially when it blinds you. Years later, I would come across another line from Mark Twain that hit me harder than any truth I had ever faced. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. And the bad judgment I made during those years would cost me more than I ever imagined. Because the first real crack in my marriage didn't come with shouting, it came with something far quieter. One evening, when Linda stopped waiting for me to come home.
The night everything finally broke, I came home 2 hours late. Not because of anything important, just overtime at the store and a long conversation with a customer about power tools. The kind of thing I always told myself was part of being a responsible man. When I opened the front door, the house felt different. Quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a home winding down for the evening, but the hollow kind. The kind that makes your footsteps echo. The kitchen light was off. The dinner plates weren't on the table. I remember setting my keys down slowly, listening. "Linda?" I called. No answer. I walked into the kitchen and saw a small white envelope sitting in the center of the table. My name was written on it in her handwriting. For the first time in many years, I felt something tighten in my chest. Inside the envelope was a single folded page. Her words were neat and careful, just like everything else she did. "I waited for you tonight, not for dinner, but for a conversation. I waited for you last week too, and last month. And if I'm honest, I've been waiting for years." I sat down slowly in the chair. The clock on the wall ticked loudly behind me. Her letter continued. "You are a good provider, a hard-working man, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being my partner. I tried to reach you, I really did. But a marriage can't survive when only one person is speaking." My hands were trembling by the time I reached the last line. "I'm staying with my sister for a while. I need space to remember who I am, outside of your silence." I stared at that page for a long time, long enough to realize something terrible. My wife hadn't left me because of one big mistake. She left because of 1,000 small moments, when I chose being right over being present. And in that quiet kitchen, I finally understood a truth that men like me often learn far too late. The kind of truth writers like Mark Twain tried to warn us about. Life doesn't usually collapse all at once. It erodes slowly, while you're busy believing everything is fine. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't know what to do. I sat there at that kitchen table long after the house had gone completely dark, Linda's letter still in my hands. The The clock ticked louder than it ever had before, like it was counting every year I had spent ignoring the things that actually mattered. My first instinct was anger. That old, familiar pride rose up inside me. She's overreacting, I told myself. People don't leave a marriage over conversations. But something about the empty house made that lie harder to believe. So instead of doing what I had done my whole life, shutting down and waiting for things to settle, I did something that felt strangely unfamiliar. I drove to her sister's house. The porch light was on when I pulled up. My headlights stretched across the yard like an accusation. For a moment, I sat in the car, staring at the front door, rehearsing the speech I had given in arguments my entire life. Logical, firm, unemotional. But when Linda opened the door, all of that disappeared. She looked tired, not angry, not dramatic, just tired. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I read your letter," I replied. She nodded slowly, like she expected that much. I remember gripping the brim of my hat, searching for the right words, the kind of apology a man like me had almost never practiced. "Linda," I said finally, "I think I've spent most of my life confusing strength with stubbornness." She watched me carefully. "I thought being a good man meant working hard and solving problems, but somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. The night air was cold between us, and for the first time in decades, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before: uncertainty. Because a truth had begun settling into my chest, the kind of wisdom that men often understand only after the damage has already been done. The kind of lesson people like Mark Twain tried to teach in simpler words. A man can build a whole life with his hands and still lose it by refusing to open his heart. Linda didn't answer me right away. She stood there on the porch with her arms folded loosely, the yellow porch light casting soft shadows across her face. I had known that face for 30 years, every freckle, every small crease near her eyes. But that night, I realized there were parts of her I had never really tried to understand. "You always say the right things after something breaks," she said gently. Her voice wasn't sharp. If anything, it carried a quiet sadness that cut deeper than anger ever could. "I'm not here to win an argument," I replied. "That's the problem," she said. "You always thought marriage was an argument someone had to win." Her words hung in the cold air. Behind her, I could hear her sister moving around in the kitchen. A kettle whistled faintly somewhere in the house. Life continuing, while mine felt like it had paused. "I didn't know I was losing you," I said quietly. Linda gave a small, tired smile. "That's because you never looked." Those words stayed with me longer than anything else she said that night. For the next few minutes we talked, not loudly, not dramatically, just two people standing on a porch, finally speaking honestly after years of silence. I didn't defend myself the way I usually did. I didn't interrupt. I listened. And the more I listened, the clearer something became. The damage I had caused wasn't loud or explosive. It had been slow, built out of moments where I dismissed feelings, avoided conversations, or believed my role as provider was enough. Eventually, Linda stepped back toward the doorway. "I'm not saying this marriage is over," she said, "but I need time to see if anything has really changed." I nodded. For once, I didn't argue. As I walked back to my car that night, another line from Mark Twain echoed in my mind, a line I had once laughed at, but now understood completely. "It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled." And the man I had fooled the longest was myself. The months that followed were the quietest of my life. Linda stayed at her sister's house for a while. Daniel moved out shortly after graduating high school and started spending most of his time at a friend's place. The house on Maple Street, once filled with the sound of cooking, laughter, and late-night television, became painfully still. At first, I thought the silence was punishment, but slowly I realized it was something else. It was space. Space to finally hear things I had ignored for years. I started noticing small memories that used to pass right by me. The way Linda used to wait by the window when I worked late, the way Daniel would linger in the garage, hoping I'd ask about his baseball games. The way conversations had slowly shortened in our home until they became nothing but schedules and errands. For the first time, I began doing something I had never done before. I reflected. I started reading again in the evenings, not newspapers or repair manuals, but books about people who had spent their lives observing human nature. Writers who understood pride, stubbornness, and the strange ways we sabotage the people we love. One night, I came across a passage by Mark Twain that felt like it had been written directly for men like me. The secret of getting ahead is getting started. It sounds simple, but starting meant something different now. It meant calling my son without giving him advice. It meant apologizing without explaining myself afterward. It meant asking Linda how she felt and accepting whatever answer she gave. Some conversations were awkward. Some were quiet. Some ended sooner than I hoped. But slowly, something began to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, just small human shifts. Daniel started visiting again on Sundays. Linda agreed to meet for coffee once every few weeks. We talked, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing at all. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to understand. It took nearly a year before Linda moved back into the house. Not with fanfare, not with dramatic promises. Just one quiet Saturday morning when her car pulled into the driveway with a few boxes in the back seat. We didn't hug right away. We didn't make speeches. Instead, we did something far simpler. We made coffee together. I remember standing beside her at the kitchen counter, listening to the same old clock ticking on the wall. For the first time in many years, the silence between us didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. Our marriage wasn't magically perfect after that. Life doesn't work that way. But it became something better than it had ever been before. Honest. I started listening more than I spoke. I learned that kindness carries more strength than stubborn pride. And most importantly, I learned that love doesn't survive on hard work alone. It survives on attention. Sometimes I think about all those lessons that men like me learned too late. Wisdom that writers like Mark Twain tried to leave behind for us. And I wonder, how many lives could be different if we listened sooner? So I'll leave you with a question. If someone you love tried to talk to you tonight, would you truly listen? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone or something worth protecting, stay with me for the next story.